Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 211. Today is Pesach Sheni, so let's begin by speaking about that. It is a day that Pesach Sheni, of course, in the Pasuk and the Chumash talks the story where the Idden, the Jews who are unable to bring the Passover offering in the Pesach Rishon, because they were either b'derech recheka, because they were distant from the place where the Beis Hamikdash was, or they were tamei, impure. So they came and cried out to Moshe Rabbeinu, to God, Lama nigara, why is our lot less? And in response, Hashem gave another mitzvah called Pesach Sheni. And as a result, we have the idea, as the Frierdiker Rebbe says, brought in Hayom Yom of today, Pesach Sheni's lesson to us, Asher kem l'shtaken farfallen. There's never mean that nothing is ever lost. We always have another opportunity. So even if a soul is distant in a spiritual sense, in every possible sense, or it is impure, it always has another chance to correct its ways. So we'll begin with that because, of course, that's immediately a Chassidus applied message in the most direct possible sense. The lesson to each one of us. None of us are perfect. We have our flaws, we have our setbacks, we make our mistakes. So the lesson of Pesach Sheni is Nishtaken Farfallen. There's no such thing as resignation or fatalism or that something is impossible, because you can always correct. That's in a very basic level the lesson of this day. In personal life, this comes into play in so many different ways, both in our relationships, whether it's marital relationships or friendships, or between parents and children, or between you and yourself and between you and God. We all, as I said, have different situations where things don't always work the way the first time around. So we have the Pesach Sheni lesson that tells us Nishtaken Farfallen. You could say it's the concept of tshuva, but the Rebbe explains in a number of places that it has a certain message that's even beyond tshuva. Tshuva, of course, means that in every situation a person can correct. Here, Pesach Sheni is an additional lesson that not only that you can correct your way, but that there's nothing ever lost. It's a different expression. So even though there's overlap, but the expression nothing ever lost, nothing is farfallen, basically is giving us the ability to know and the confidence that in every given situation, it's a personal message that you always have another opportunity and other opportunities. So that's a great way to begin. I will also add that in Tafshin Yud, the first year of the Rebbe's leadership, right a few months after Yud Shvat, the Rebbe spoke in a Sikha Beizir that year, he mentioned something about this day. This is also the day, which is the Pesach Sheni, is always the 29th of Omer. So in the corresponding 29th of the Omer is, of course, Chesed Shebehod. We're in the week of Hod, the beginning of the first day of the week of Hod this year, Sunday. So the Rebbe brings the Siddur Torah Eir that the Frierdiker Rebbe used. There was a mistake, and it said there, Chesed Shebechesed. And the Frierdiker Rebbe corrected, in his handwriting, he corrected and wrote Chesed Shebehed. And the Rebbe explained everything is divine providence, especially in things connected to Torah and mitzvahs. What is the difference between the two? The Rebbe says, when Anosi B'Yisrael, Zman HaGolus, in a time of exile, and especially Be'ikfus of the Mashiach, which means in the end of the exile, Ikfus of Mashiach literally means the footsteps of Mashiach, or the heel of Mashiach, meaning we're coming close to the coming of Mashiach, you have to write. And the Rebbe cites in Likutei Torah, Vayichtav Moshe, the writing of a Nasi, HaChesed, meaning to have to be mamshech, you have to draw down the Chesed Shebehod. So even though technically you could say it was a mistake, or it was a Tosat Fus, however you want to explain it, but the Rebbe writing it, it was more than just a correction, it was something that the Rebbe essentially is drawing down the idea that you need Chesed of Hod. What does this mean? Chassidus explains that Hod, the word Hod, which is this week's Sfira, has three meanings. One is, of course, Heidah, acknowledgement, yielding, but there's also the words letters Dova, which is connected in Eicha with the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So Heid can also be connected to the fifth, since it's the fifth Sfira, it's connected to the things that happen in the fifth millennia, which were not positive events, Gvuras, very heavy Gvuras. Heid is, of course, on the left side, like Gvura. So when we say Chesed Shebehed, it's like Hamtakas HaGvuras, is the sweetening of the Gvura. And when the Rebbe writes it, he's giving the strength to actually transform the negative of Hod into or you could say the severities of Hod, I should correct myself, to reveal the Chesed of Hod, which is today's day. Now you could say Pesach Sheni is connected to that as well. Why? Because Pesach Sheni indicates that there was some type of problem. They were either B'derech Recheka, which is of course Golus, is sometimes compared to B'al Halach Medina Sayam, a husband that traveled in a distant way away from his spouse. So you can say that it's a Golus relates to the distance and also relates to Tumah, impurity. When we're in a state of spiritual impurity, because of our iniquities, we were exiled from our land. So in a state like that, Pesach Sheni has a tremendous lesson that what? That even in a situation of Golus, of Hoid, we find the Chesed Shebahoid, that there's Nishtakim Farfalm. The same Rebbe who said Nishtakim Farfalm is the one that wrote Chesed Shebahoid on this day. So it's revealing, as the Rebbe says, that Menashe Yisrael, Tzorech Lichtiv, especially in Golus, especially in Likvus Chesed Shebahoid, meaning drawing out the Chesed of Hoid, which again is the tremendous lesson that no matter what we're going through in life, there's always that positive side, and there's revealing it through our crying out. Why? Why are we less? Why are we being deprived? That cry itself draws out a deeper chesed, and that chesed is that the Shtokim Farfal, nothing is lost, and you can always find a way, and you can bring the Korban Pesach just as they did the first time, because of the cry and because of this opportunity that Pesach Sheni provides us. Okay. With that, let us also speak about, before I continue, let me say that this program is dedicated in loving memory of Charles Weinstein, Yeshaya ben David. And I want to use this opportunity to also invite and encourage you to help support this program through your contributions, dedications, or sponsorships. You can go to meaningfullife.com/sponsorship and sponsor and contribute as you see fit. This program is made possible by community grants and your individual grants, or people like yourself who benefit from it and see the value of this. Also, an opportunity to mention, of course, that questions of all sorts are welcome. You go to meaningfullife.com/mylife, and there's a forum where you can write anonymous questions of every sort. Nothing is off limits, and hopefully we'll address everything in its time, because there's a lot of backlog. Just be patient, but we will address the questions. You'll also find there at meaningfullife.com/mylife a wide array of resources. Firstly, all the archives of all the 210 previous episodes, plus the essays and other materials that are linked to that are a tremendous resource to be able to actually improve each one of our lives based on the teachings of Torah and Chassidus. With that, let me go, since this week as well, Thursday is Lag BaOmer, and it's also the week of Parsha Emor in Chutz La'aretz. So we'll talk about that as well. But Pesach Sheni, of course, and Chavtes Emor and the Chesed Shebahoid is actually today. So of course it's timely in the most timely fashion, literally what we're living with on this particular day, the energy of this day. Lag BaOmer, I've discussed a number of times in the past, and I want to give you some cross-referencing. First of all, to Pesach Sheni, I want to cross-reference to episode 66, 116, and 161. And Lag BaOmer, episode 17, 66, 116, and 162. So Lag BaOmer, of course, is called in Chassidus, in the Maimer V'Sfartem, in Samach Vav, the Matan Torah of Pnimis HaTorah. There are many angles there are many aspects to the Lag BaOmer, but I'm going to focus on that, being that this is Chassidus applied. The Matan Torah of Pnimis HaTorah. In a number of places, the Rebbe compares that to Yutes Kislev is the Rosh Hashanah of Torah's Chassidus. Why is it the Matan Torah of Pnimis HaTorah? Because Sefer HaZayar, which is authored by Rashbi, Lag BaOmer, is the Histalkus and Hilula of the Rashbi, the day that he requested that this should be called it should be a celebrated day, Yom Simchasei Shel Rashbi, which is why we celebrate Lag BaOmer. Matan Torah of Pnimis HaTorah. This is the day, as we read in the Zohar, in the conclusion in Parsha Azinu, what's called the Idra Zuta, the small group, which was Rabbi Rashbi and his 7 students, where he spoke about obviously the great elevation that he went through as he was leaving this world, his talkus bechat katiris katarna, and all the different expressions that are mentioned there in Zohar and explained in Chassidus, how Rashbi on this day connected to the highest levels, katira from the word kteris, binding himself with one bound. I bind myself to the highest levels, and all the other details enumerated there. So in a way, it's like the conclusion of the Zohar, because the conclusion of Rashbi's life on this earth. Therefore, it's called Matan Torah of Pnimis HaTorah, which of course has much connection to the Torah of Chassidus, which would be revealed years later, but based on, of course, the teachings of the Zohar and the teachings of the Mekubalim afterwards, which all are based on Zohar, and ultimately the teachings of the Arizal, and as that evolved through his students, all the way to the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, and Torah's Chassidus Chabad. So it's a Matan Torah when it was given. So obviously by Matan Torah itself, by Sinai, all the Torah was given. So how do you say it's the Matan Torah? Because obviously it means not the Matan Torah that was given Torah b'Pirusha, no, the Torah was given at Har Sinai to Moshe with Pirusha, with its commentaries, with its interpretation, in Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, both the literal, the allegorical, the homiletic, and the secrets, the mystical and esoteric teachings. But in that itself, the esoteric teaching, the Zohar is a more revealed form of it. You don't really see it in a revealed way in the Torah Shebiksav, the Torah Shebal Peh, just like we say Chsimus HaShas, of the time when the Shas was written. Zohar was also a time when Rabbi Abba wrote it down at the instruction of Rabbi Rashbi. So we're talking Matan Torah, not in the sense the Matan Torah that replaces. Matan Torah, Chassidus says, only will be once. Even Lasid Love, you're not going to have another Matan Torah in the future. But nevertheless, when it says Matan Torah, it's because this is a day when, on a revealed way, the Torah was given by the Rashbi to his students, and for generations to come. Obviously, in those years, it was much more for Yechidei Gula, for individuals, and very much kept secret. But in later years, when the Arizal said, mitzvah legal is chochmah, now is a mitzvah to reveal this wisdom. And then, of course, with the Baal Shem Tov, as I said, in Chassidus, then it became something that is meant to be widespread, and ultimately, as a preparation for the Geula, Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza, to spread it everywhere possible. So Lag BaOmer, in its sense, is the link between the inner and the outer dimensions of Torah. Rashbi, of course, was a sage in both levels, both the inner and the outer. And because of the inner dimension, that is also why Lag BaOmer has such a power of unity, as we see the unification of Eden everywhere on Lag BaOmer, both in Miron and everywhere in the world, the celebration of all people, Ashkenazim and Sfardim, Chassidim and non-Chassidim, and so on. And you also find the second element of Lag BaOmer is, of course, the day that the 24,000 students of Rebbe Akiva, the epidemic, the plague that struck them due to their not respecting one another, ended. So Lag BaOmer becomes a simcha for that too. And the connection, Rabbi Akiva is the one that says, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha," zeh klal gadol b'Torah, that the loving your fellow, that says in Chumash that we just read yesterday actually, is a klal gadol b'Torah. It's a fundamental principle in Torah, and yet his students had difficulty fulfilling that, which of course is odd. And the answer is because they were bad people, God forbid, but because of their greatness, they were intolerant of one another due to their complete passion and consumed with their approach to things. So they nogu koved zeh b'zeh. They didn't show honor to one another. Chassidus explains it like the world of Tohu. Tohu is a holy world, but the energies are so intense that they cannot tolerate one another, and therefore ultimately creates a shvira, a shattering. Rashbi was one of those students of Rabbi Akiva who corrected it, and was the one that united him with the other of the five students, and they were the ones that remained and taught the teachings of Rabbi Akiva in actuality, even though his other students clearly knew the principles, but because of their own intensity, they were unable to implement it. Rashbi, as we know, after 12 years of being in the cave, hiding in the cave, and he came out, he was so pure, so refined, that whatever he looked at began to burn, literally or figuratively, because he saw the pettiness that people were involved in. His holiness literally was intolerant of it. So the Eibishter says to him, go back into the cave a 13th year, a bar mitzvah year. One more year for maturity, spiritual maturity. Now when he came out the 13th year, the Gemara says, whatever he saw that was broken, he repaired. Instead of the intolerance, instead of burning it up, instead of shattering it, he repaired it. And that's ultimately what Avos Yisrael. Avos Yisrael doesn't mean that there aren't differences between people. We were created that we have differences. But it's looking for a deeper connection. The deeper connection is Hashem Echad, Barchenu Avinu Kolonu Echad, as he explains in Tanya chapter 32, that there's an underlying unity that transcends the diversity. And in that sense, Av Echad Kolonu, we have one Father, Kulam Asimas, and we all are comparable. And miyodea, we don't know whose soul is greater. And we understand that we need each other and everyone complements one another. So instead of looking at the differences, you look at how we complement and create a deeper unity. All these are messages from Lag BaOmer, the message of the harmony within diversity, the message within the message of love and unconditional love, and of course the message of revealing the inner dimension of Torah, which in a sense is the inner dimension of the neshama, nishmasa da'araisa. When you focus on the guf, as he says in Tanya, can separate us, but the neshama connects us. So learning Pnimis Torah and on Matan Torah, Pnimis Torah is a connecting force because you see the soul within things. And when you see the soul within things, you see their commonality as opposed to their distinctions. So these are some of the lessons. Now, of course, Emer begins essentially with the same theme. Emer v'amarti lahazir agdelim al aktanim. Lahazir can mean that they should caution, but lahazir also comes from the word zohar, connecting it to Lag BaOmer. Zohar means to illuminate, to radiate. So lahazir delim al aktanim is not just to educate and caution and warn with negativity, but lahazir also means to illuminate, that the gedolim should illuminate the ktanim, that the adults should illuminate and radiate the way for children, for their children. A lesson for all of us, even though it's talking there about the Kohanim, a lesson for all of us that education, even when there is a need to caution, and even when there's a need for discipline, it's permeated and infused with a positive element of illumination and lighting the way for one another. That is essentially the word emer. So emer is not kosher kegidum like besagid when you say kesemer lebnei beis Yaakov. Emer, you speak gently. So even though you're educating, you may even be disciplining, but it's done with gentleness and with done with light and radiation and radiating and illuminating, rather than just then seeing it as gvura. Chesed shebeheid, that is done in a chesedik way, in a loving way, even when it's heid or gvura, it's chesed shebegvura and chesed shebeheid. That even the left side is also driven by the kindness, and that is the first step in heid. The first day of the week of heid starts with chesed shebeheid, and then it progresses through the week, each different dimension of that sphere. Yes. Emer I spoke about as well in cross-referencing it to episodes 115 and 161. Let us now go over to some questions, as we usually do, some new questions, and we'll do some follow-up as well. And question number one that we're going to cover is something, just a contemporary piece of news, something that Rebbe often commented on when we saw things happen in the world, whether it was positive or negative. The Rebbe would comment on it and address it, always, of course, with a lesson to us, not just talking about politics or world events or current events, but it's lesson to us. So here's a question someone just asked. North and South Korea peace. Are the latest peace talks between North and South Korea another sign of Mashiach? North and South Korea are making peace. There are even talks of North Korea neutralizing their nuclear program. Is this another sign of Mashiach? Similar to what took place in 1992 when they were converting warfare into food production, as the Rebbe discussed back then, Tov Nun Aleph and Nun Beis. The Rebbe then said this is a fulfillment of one of the messianic prophecies. Yes, they will convert, they will turn their swords into plowshares. So that's the question. Well, we only know what we were taught. Speculation is always not for us, but we go on what we were taught, what we saw from the Rebbe and from the previous Rabbeim. Firstly, I want to say is not every piece of news we have to run after. It doesn't always mean necessarily it's going to turn out exactly as it's promised. Does not mean we should be negative and cynic and skeptical, but rather just to keep that in mind. That dealing with a volatile region and has its challenges, but let's think positively. And yes, when you see, for whatever reason, whether the North Korea feels the pressure or feels the economic pressure or other pressures that it needs for its own benefit to make peace with South Korea and ultimately eliminate its nuclear program, of course that's good news. It's less threat and more stability in the world is always a positive thing and always leading toward Mashiach, because we say in the Pasuk, the Psukim, as the Rambam clearly says, that there will be Loi Milchama. So any form of war or potential war is clearly not a sign of Mashiach. When you see another country eliminating possible war and possible belligerence and hostilities, it's clearly that alone is a sign of Mashiach, and that goes without saying. You don't even need any source for that because it's filled with sources. It's exactly what the sign of what Mashiach will be, a world peace. Just as when the Rebbe spoke, as you mentioned back then, Shinun Aleph for the Gulf War, and prior to that, the fall of the Soviet Union, these are all signs of Geula, because Geula is when countries will no longer be fighting. One nation will not raise its sword to another nation. And that is, of course, a sign of the Geula Mashiach. And there's a number of psukim that testify to that explain that. In this particular case, clearly, as the Rebbe said it back then, almost 25 years ago, 24 years ago, 23 years ago, spoke about it then, we can only go closer to the Geula, not, God forbid, more distant. Because every day we do more mitzvahs and more good deeds, so it accumulates. And there's no question that it impacts the world, and the world is becoming a more refined place, a more humanitarian place. You see that even in recent books that have been published, explaining with real hard statistics on the ground how the world is becoming less warlike, less violent, less famine, less poverty in every possible way. Obviously, there are challenges, and when we're living in something, you always see the worst because you look at it from the ground level and you don't think of it in terms of context. But if you put it in the context of generations past, even last century, you see clearly the decline of the negative and the ascent of the positive. Even the things that are negative, as the Rebbe explained, Purim, Tov Shemem Zayin, and a number of other times, there's the concept that comes before the Geula of also Yizbararu v'Yislabnu Hadvarim, that exposing and seeing the negative is better than it being concealed. So in the same process, as the world becomes better, there will be things that will emerge that will appear very negative, but that emerging is also part of the same process. And that's exactly how the Rebbe depicts the times in which we are in, and that's how we have to look through those eyes. If a person wants to look with their own eyes and come to their own conclusions, it's not the Rebbe's eyes, it's not Torah eyes, it's the eyes of a limited person who can always say, when you see something in front of you burning, all you see is the burning. But if you see the context of history, and you also can have a Eizer Chachma Re'es HaNeled that sees the birthing and the future in the sense of seeing where the world is headed, where we see the trajectory and we have a bird's eye view, which of course is what a Rebbe gives us. It's a very different look, and that's a look that I'm describing now. So yes, absolutely the answer is it is, and hopefully it actually materializes, and that's what we're hoping for. And if it does materialize, it clearly is definitely another step in the way, and hopefully we can achieve full peace, as the Rambam explains, le'malchama, le'rov, le'kinav, le'sachrus, is the hallmarks of what the Geula will be like. With that, let us move right to the next question, which is a great segue. What is the difference between asking Hashem to bring Mashiach and to bring the Geula? So firstly, let me just say, before I read the question in detail, Mashiach and Geula has obviously been addressed here a number of times. Episodes 7, 22, 47, 48, 89, 158, 209. Clearly, it needs a lot more discussion. There's much to say, and I will try to talk about some of these matters in the next question or two that ask these questions, and I'm sure there'll be follow-up and more questions that I know that are coming that address the question of Mashiach and Geula, including a question which I'll begin to speak about, which is a general one to describe in simple English what it means Mashiach and Geula. I don't know if I've ever done it actually in all these episodes. I believe I have, but recently I received a question, so I'm wondering maybe it's time to go over that again. But let me go now with the questions as it was asked here, the difference between asking Hashem. So here someone writes, Hi Rabbi Jacobson. What is the difference between asking Hashem to bring Mashiach and to bring the Geula? Is Ani Mamin, we say we believe in the coming of Mashiach without mentioning the Geula. In Ani Mamin we say we believe in the coming of Mashiach, Ani Mamin b'bias HaMashiach. Without mentioning the Geula. So there you see Mashiach mentioned, Ani Mamin b'bias HaMashiach. Then, while growing up, I heard many people repeat, Mashiach is here, you just need to open your eyes. That's words from the Rebbe. However, I don't understand what the point of Mashiach being here is if it's without the Geula. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer people's questions. Hashem should continuously shower you with revealed blessings, and we should all be zeichet to greet Mashiach Tzidkenu with the Geula right away. So let's start with basically practical, on a very practical level, Geula Mashiach. Geula means redemption, Mashiach means an individual, Mashiach Tzidkenu, who will be the one that leads us into the redemption. Think of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Moshe Rabbeinu. Yetzias Mitzrayim is the event of exodus from Egypt. Who is the leader Hashem chose? God chose is Moshe Rabbeinu, the Goyal Rishon, the first redeemer to redeem us out of Golus Mitzrayim. Goyal Achrin, the final redeemer, is called Mashiach Tzidkenu, some David Malka Mashiach, because he comes from the house of David, as the Rambam explains, based on the Nevuos and the prophecies, and he will lead us out of the final Golus, this Golus that we are in now. So on a very practical level, Geula and Mashiach go hand in hand. Obviously, Geula is the event itself, and Mashiach is the individual that leads us through this event. So it's not Mashiach first and Geula second. It's when the Eibishter wants to bring the Geula, just like when he wanted to bring the Jews, take the Jews out of Mitzrayim, he sent Moshe Rabbeinu. He sent them beforehand to speak to Parei, to inform the Jews, as we read in Chumash. It comes to the Geula Amitis Vashlema, as the Rambam explains, the Geula is a process that is throughout of all of history. We'll talk about, but the Geula is an event that is indicated by a few things. Like he speaks in chapter 11, he says in chapter 11 of Hilchos Malachim that Im Yamed Ish Mebeis David, there'll be a man who stands up from the house of David, and he'll be Huga, he'll be completely dedicated and immersed and committed to Torah mitzvahs, and he will influence and inspire others to do the same, and will fight a God's war. So it says if that's the case, he's Becheskas Mashiach, as the Rambam says, means he's assumed to be Mashiach. But that's still not Vadai. It doesn't make a for sure Mashiach. Then comes the next stage. He wins these battles. He builds the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, Bimkeimei, the third temple in its place, and he gathers the exiles back to Israel. That makes a Mashiach Vadai. So you see here two things happening: events that have to happen, and there's the person who's leading the way. So that's the key difference. If you want to describe the Geula itself, what kind of state of the world it will be, go to chapter 12 in the Rambam. And that's what he says, like I said before, it will be a world, there will be no more war, no more hunger and famine, and no more jealousy, and no more acrimony, and no more unhealthy competition. But what will there be? Lo yi esa kol ha'elam. The business of the world will be nothing but to know God. And he continues on, describes that in more detail, finally with the verse, there will be the world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Obviously, there's a lot more to discuss than describing the Geula, but that's Geula language. God could have, of course, brought the Geula any way he likes, but just as Mitzis Mitzrayim, he wanted a human being, Moshe Rabbeinu, Geula Amitis Vashlem, he wants David Malka Mashiach, he wants the Mashiach Tzidkenu to be the one that leads us through that. So that's the difference. Sometimes you'll find references to both. Geula Amitis Vashlema al Yedei Mashiach Tzidkenu, the Geula through Mashiach. Sometimes there'll be reference just to the Geula. Sometimes there'll be reference just to Mashiach. But when you say Ani Mamin, for instance, as you mentioned, I believe with complete faith. Obviously, you're believing Mashiach as he brings the Geula. That the Mashiach will come and bring the Geula. But it's the Geula that is the event, and Mashiach is the one that leads that way. So I think that more or less clarifies it. Why sometimes there's emphasis on one, sometimes on others, that's another discussion. Now you have to explain case by case, but they go hand in hand, and one cannot really happen without the other based on halacha in the Rambam. Okay. What's the point of Mashiach being here without the Geula? Okay, that's another discussion. You could have the Eibishter will reveal himself, as the Chassam Sefer says, that in every generation there's a potential Mashiach. The Eibishter reveals himself when the time comes for him to bring the Geula. Can there be a Mashiach without a Geula? That's another discussion. You could argue that the Mashiach is not Vadai until there's not argue, the Rambam says this clearly, that there's no third temple. If he doesn't do that and doesn't gather the exiles, you can't call it Mashiach Vadai. So you don't have the Geula, you don't have Mashiach, you have Mashiach that be a potential Mashiach. But Geula dictates when it's a Mashiach Vadai, and Geula is defined by these conditions as I just described. Another question in this vein: why do our actions make a difference when Hashem will be the one that takes us out of Golus? Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. My question for you today is, coming from the 28th of Nisan, when the Rebbe told us to do all we can to bring Mashiach, and in general the Rebbe said to increase in acts of goodness and kindness to hasten his coming, I would think Hashem is the one that takes us out of Golus. After all, He is the one that put us in Golus. So why do our actions make a difference, and how do our actions accomplish redemption like 2 + 2 = 4? How does our good deeds equal Geula? Okay, good question, basic question, but you probably, if you learn Chassidus, especially Tanya, and then later Maimorim, and especially in the Rebbe's talks, you find the answer very clearly. It is true what the Frierdiker Rebbe said. The Rebbe Rashab actually said it, and when the Frierdiker Rebbe said it when he left prison, Yi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu, he said, Nish mitun zerotzen. He quotes, cites his father, the Rebbe Rashab. Not with our will did we go into Golus, and not with our will we go out of Golus. The Eibishter will take us out of Golus. So it's correct. But how does the Eibishter take us out of Golus? We cannot go on our own to go rebuild the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. It needs a directive from above that tells us a Mashiach does the job. We cannot go create Chis HaMesim or many other things that are dependent on God wanting to happen. You can't force the Geula. But how do you bring the Geula? What will cause Hashem to want to lead us out of Golus? That is not just by whim, God forbid. The Alter Rebbe paskins and says very clearly, Ayidei Maseinu v'Avodeseinu, beginning of chapter 37, after describing the world of Mashiach and Geula, and I should mention what I said, the Rambam, chapter 36 is a description of Geula from the point of view of Chassidus, which of course complements what it says in the Rambam. After describing that what will be the revelation that will be when Mashiach comes, when the Geula comes. So then he continues, that Hine, this Gili of Yemesim Mashiach and Chis HaMesim, which is Gili Ein Sof Be'elam Hazeh HaGashmi, the revelation of the divine in this material world, will happen al yidei maseinu v'avodeseinu, through our actions and our service. This is the Rambam. This is the Alter Rebbe. It's not really a chiddush of the Alter Rebbe because it was always known that our Torah and mitzvahs are not just disconnected; they are, and that is dependent that God's plan in this world should be realized. In other words, God didn't just create a world and says, you go do Torah and mitzvahs. And I'll decide one day, unrelated to your actions, when the Geula will come. No. We absolutely are part of the equation. We are part of the unfolding destiny and the unfolding drama. And that's why the Gemara says, when Mashiach is asked, when will you come? He said, Hayem, im bekele tishmo. Today, if you listen bekele to God's voice, to God's wishes. Mashiach said to the Baal Shem Tov, that he said, when will you come? When your well springs will spread. Everything here connected to our Aved. The Frierdiker Rebbe already explains in the Kutei Diburim why it's not a contradiction. Mashiach answers, Hayem bekel tishmo, and here he answers, Yefutz menesecha chutza, because as the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, this is as an aside, it's because we already have the bekel tishmo. So Baal Shem Tov is asking, now what? So Mashiach says, now, through Yefutz menesecha chutza. You can look it up in the Kutei Diburim, he speaks about this at length. But let's go back to our topic here. So yes, the bottom line is God decides the moment. But what pushes him to decide, so to speak? What is the incentive, or what motivates that decision is what the whole Chassidus talks about. Aveda sa'odam. V'avadtem es'hashem alekechem. Halos man, in the language of Kabbalah and Chassidus, that asusa del tata. When you make asusa del tata, God responds with asusa del eil. There's also the difference between zochu and achisheno, be'ito and achisheno, that will come in its time, or it comes through our Aveda, we can speed it up. But bottom line, any way possible, ultimately our Aveda is a direct impact. Why? As he explains in chapter 37 in Tanya, because our Aveda reveals the divine in existence. As he continues to explain chapter 37, when you do a mitzvah, you're revealing the divine purpose in that mitzvah, in that physical act, whether it's Daka or the other examples he gives there. So when we reveal the divine in something, you're revealing the so-called the Geula within it. Therefore, the whole Geula is a result of a process that began from the beginning of time, that every good deed builds a building block, a brick, and together it will erupt and become the Geula. So there's an event at the end of the process, that's called Geula, Al Yidei Mashiach Tzidkenu. But it's not an event that's divorced or separate from in any way the Aveda leads to that. So it's a direct result of our Aveda. I hope that clarifies that point. And therefore the words of the Rebbe Chav Ches Nissen are completely consistent with this theme and with this message. I will discuss more in coming episodes, Geula and Mashiach, because I see a lot of questions are coming in just on the basic, what is it exactly? But I'll just say one line that's critical to remember. Think of it as a journey, reaching the destination of a journey that began the beginning of time. So God, the cosmic engineer, the cosmic architect, built existence, created existence with a plan and a purpose. That plan and purpose he communicated to us through the mandate that he gave us called the Torah, that we'll be celebrating shortly, Matan Torah. When we follow that guideline and think of it as God's operator's manual, life's operator's manual, the cosmic engineer and architect gave us this book and directions of how to live life to the fullest. What means to the fullest? To fulfill the purpose for which it was created. So when we follow it and we live up to it, we are actually fulfilling the purpose of existence. And the destination means the end result is, when we do that, the world is aligned with the manual that the operator gave us, which is divine operator, God, with what God wants. That's called Geula, a world aligned with its creator. So Mashiach is not just an addition, some addendum. It is the fruition, the realization of the entire purpose of existence from the beginning of time. Every act, every step of the way, leading toward this destination in this long marathon and journey. So when we're told we're now at the threshold, it means we're at the end of this journey. And the cumulative mitzvahs and Torah that were done, and good deeds, by all peoples, by Jews of course, and also even non-Jews, refined the world, revealed more of the divine in the world, made it a better world, leading to a point where it will accumulate, as I said before, an erupt, but an eruption as a result of accumulative billions and billions and billions of good deeds, of sacrifices and prices paid. And the destination is the end result of it all, which of course, the God, the cosmic engineer, as I said, an architect, is the one that determines when that point comes. But every act we do directly contributes to it. It's not some separate inyan sguli. You do something and maybe God responds or doesn't. No, he bound himself and said, your actions, my Seinu of the Seinu, will lead to that. And that's how we understand the entire picture. As I said, we'll talk about this more in coming weeks. With that, let me go to another question. Well, everything's related, but this is not directly related. And this question is, does God accept us for who we are, or does he want us to become someone else? So you could say it is a segue from what we're discussing. Let me read this question in detail. Does God accept us for who we are, or does he want us to become someone else? I have heard the analogy used to describe someone who wants God, but does not want to keep the Torah. Someone asks his or her spouse, can you get me a cup of coffee? The spouse responds, no, but I love you. I really want to stay here and be with you. And I get it. You can't have a relationship with God that is entirely on your own terms. If you care about him, do what he asks of you. But God doesn't ask us to get him a cup of coffee or even to wash the dishes or take out the garbage. He asks us to change things that are a lot more closely linked to who we are as individuals. If a man comes to me and says, I want you to dress like this and not like that, and don't do these things that you enjoy, or go to these places at these times, now, will you marry me? I would say, no way. Go find yourself a wife who fits the profile you're looking for. But with God, it's not so simple. I want to be close to him. I am asking these questions because I am beginning to find that some things I have learned about keeping halacha are bringing me farther away, motivating me to do less instead of more. I learned that mitzvahs are the rope that connects us to Hashem, and when we do an aveda, no matter how seemingly insignificant, we cut a strand of that rope. I also learned that it causes God pain when we act on our own impulses, like putting the king's head in a vessel of vomit, to quote the Tanya. So now when I don't keep aspects of halacha, I feel distant from God, and I really don't want to cause him pain, but I also don't want to change things that I feel are a part of who I am and what I need at this point in my life. It feels stifling, which brings me back to the question, does God accept us for who we are, or does he want us to become someone else? Okay, very good question, and I'm sure others have the similar question. And let me address it exactly in context of what I just said before. When it comes to two human beings, you mentioned spouses, let's use that as an example. So they're both flawed human beings, and not necessarily the interest of one is really necessarily the interest of the other. Why? Your husband says he wants you to wear a certain dress that you don't happen to like. He wants you to do something. We're not talking about menschliche things that are expected normal relationship things, but things that are just his whim or her whim. Then why is your will better than mine? Now, people who love each other may overlook it and do it anyway. But you can't say there's something absolute about it. Sometimes we'll overlook our own comforts for the love of another. But there's nothing absolute about it. When it comes to God, there's one key difference, tremendously key difference. God created us. And He created the machine. He created your being. He created everything about you. And says in His manual, as I said, operator's manual, I'm using that just to drive the point home, that this is the best way to use your machine. So it's not like a husband who says, if you walk a certain way, you come with me and do something that I enjoy, that's the best that you will be. No, that's what I want. And if you love me, you'll do it. And maybe vice versa. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. If it's something offensive or something that is inappropriate, you don't have to listen. But God is not coming from that perspective. There's no two equals here. God created us and said, here's the best way for you to be. You'll say, 1 second, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Or you're asking me to refrain from doing something I enjoy. But maybe if you learn Torah and Chassidus, you'll learn that what it says in the Torah is actually the best for you to be. Just like someone will say, I want to eat certain foods. I like it. Why are you telling me not to eat the foods, doctor? Doctor says, because if you eat these foods, you can become diabetic, or they can cause you damage and harm. You say, but I enjoy it. But your machine is going to break down, God forbid, as a result of it. You eat the right foods. You have the right fitness and hygiene and exercise. I don't like to exercise. But exercise is good for your machine. A machine needs exercise. So no one's going to argue that. You may say, I'm still lazy, I want to ignore the guidelines because I'm whatever, my comfort zone. But no one's going to say that I'm going to put my hand in fire even though it gets burned. I want to put my hand in fire. Why? Because you know it's going to get burned. A person can be obstinate. Of course they can be obstinate, but then they cause themselves damage. God created the world in a certain way, created the human being a certain way, and He's telling us here's the best way you can be. The fact that you're not comfortable with it, or you're comfortable in doing things the Torah says you shouldn't do, or vice versa, you want to do things the Torah says you shouldn't do, or the Torah is telling you to do something you don't like to do, is it's due to your ignorance. You don't know what makes the machine work best. And maybe if you did that, it's like putting your hand in fire, but you don't feel it because God concealed it from us. Fire, when you put your hand in fire, God forbid, you're going to feel the effect right away. Other forms of behavior, you won't. That's why a mitzvah is not just about a strand and you get cut off. A mitzvah is called connection. That's how you connect your soul and your destiny to what your Creator created you for. You're aligning yourself, your machine, to the engineer that built this machine. What's an Aveda? Aveda means to move away from. Connection, a mitzvah means to move closer to align. And Aveda is a disalignment. Aveda havorim reshus l'reshus. You're disaligning yourself from the way your machine should work. You may not right away understand it, so you need to learn. Then God says, I also want a relationship with you. Yes, I want a relationship just like spouses. But, of course, it's conditioned on us doing what needs to be done that makes us healthy, or else you can't have a relationship with someone that's not healthy. So that's how you have to look at it. Very different than just God coming, I like this, and you don't like it. No, you don't like it because you don't understand how good it is for you, or you don't understand how bad it is for you, so you're doing something that may be destructive. That's the way one has to look at it. And then the relationship is a healthy one. Now, in using the example of husband and wife, I would say similar would be if a husband or a wife expect something from the other that's very healthy. Expect, for example, to show love, to show care, to show warmth. And if a spouse doesn't do that, the other spouse gets upset, that's part of who you are. And you'll say, I'm not in the mood of showing you love. Then the answer is, yes, there are times that maybe people have their ups and downs, but overall, never in the mood of showing love. That shows that you're not really functioning the way a healthy person should function within a marriage, in a relationship. Now, there may be reason, there may be things you feel your spouse is doing to you, but all of it is based on something that is unhealthy or unacceptable. Either way, maybe it's reciprocating, but regardless, it's about two human beings not living up to their potential. When it comes to God, He's telling us the way to be the best we can be, not just what He wants of us, but on the contrary, what He wants is the best that we can be. That's what Torah means. And as I said, if you don't always understand it, you have to study and learn, and you'll see that the Torah's ways are exactly the healthiest psychological, emotional, and spiritual way of feeding and nourishing and nurturing yourself as a human being. Okay. And when Mashiach comes, that's when we will all see, or they could say when people live up to this healthy version of themselves, instead of the dysfunctional version, instead of following what the social order says, or others who says they know, and you follow the way the operator's manual tells you to be, according to the cosmic operator, cosmic creator, cosmic engineer, that's when the Gula will come, when the world will be aligned to that purpose, individually and collectively. Okay. There was a question about sonogram and ultrasound, so I'll just read it and I'll just refer you because I spoke about this. Hi, as a young couple, we are hearing many different opinions about if we are allowed to do a sonogram or not. Some people have told us that the Rebbe said not to do it because it was dangerous, but nowadays it doesn't have any danger to the unborn baby. Could you please give some insight into our shita? Many thanks. See episodes 190, 191, 192, 193, and 196. I'm not going to repeat what I said there. It was just a little while ago. I brought them all the angles, and I believe it's a very thorough overview. And please go there. As I said, go to meaningfullife.com/mylife. And you can find all the previous episodes, including those. They're all time-stamped. So in case you don't have the time to listen to it all, you can just click on the link that will take you in the YouTube video straight to the area that you want to hear. But I spoke about it several episodes in a row, as you see, 190 through 193 and 196. Next question. Next question, was the Holocaust a punishment? Shalom. I'm currently watching a video of yours called Anti-Semitism, Tanya, and Non-Jews. Muslim fanaticism, Elul, and Tishrei. You quote the Rebbe as saying that the Holocaust was not a punishment but a decree. This is very hard to understand. If something is a gzeira, decree, then it doesn't matter if you're a righteous Jew, Beinoni or wicked, you're going to be slaughtered. Here we have a whimsical and cruel card, no? So obviously there is no din and no dayan based on that, on the decree. There's no judge and there's no judgment and there's no justice. Consequently, the Holocaust was simply a decree, so why did this decree happen? The Rebbe always said that the previous Rebbe was the true Messiah. In the book Collected Discourses, Likutei Diburim, Volume 3, page 62, section 30, of which many Jews are unaware, the previous Rebbe very clearly states that the Holocaust happened because the Jews in Europe were desecrating the Shabbos and other commands. How does this jive with what the Rebbe said? I heard the Rebbe did not want to sound severe because the Lord Jews of Europe were murdered, paid the ultimate price, and now are sanctified. When the previous Rebbe spoke, this was not so. Therefore, it's cruel and improper to mention their sins. Any response? Todah. Yes, of course. This is a big topic, and I am sure I must have spoken about it in episode 6, 31, 73, 104, 203, and 204. I spoke about the Holocaust, and probably referred also to the issue of being a punishment or not. So let's begin with sources. It's always good to speak about sources. You quote Likutei Diburim, fine. Let us quote the Sichos of the Rebbe in Sefer HaSichos Tov Shin Nun Aleph, the Sicha Vayechi and Shmois of that year. If you look it up, it's volume 1 of Tov Shin Nun Aleph. I refer you to the pages, it starts page 228, but more specifically page 232 and on, and I would suggest you read it thoroughly. There the Rebbe states clearly, and I'm quoting straight from there. Yeshna, he says clearly, there are negative things that happen that are not a punishment for sins, but that's because God decreed it so. And he says specifically, the Hashmodah, the 6 million being killed, is in that category. And he explains at length why you can't say it's a punishment. But it goes into the category where God says, when God was asked why the 10 martyrs were killed, he says, Shtoik kachol b'machshava, gzeirahi milfanai. Be silent, this is what arose in my will, in my thought. It's a gzeira, it's a decree. That doesn't mean there aren't reasons. But it's a reason that he could have answered, it's due to their sins. As a matter of fact, the whole point of the 10 martyrs was a result of repaying the punishment for the selling of Joseph into slavery. God doesn't say that. He says shtik. Because there's an element to a decree that is beyond us and not our role to go ahead and start explaining it through different ways of saying sins or not sins. And the Rebbe explains clearly that the Holocaust, its cruelty, was beyond any possibility to define it as simply for sins. Sins get erased. And for there to be such cruelty that for so many people cannot say it's a einish. He says it clearly. He says, Ein lanu shum hezber bir kon chochmas atera on the Shoah, on the Holocaust. And you can read this clearly, black and white. It's not even up for interpretation. And when we speak about the Shoah, we say, Hashem yinkum domo. God will avenge their blood. Why avenge their blood? If it's a sin, why is God avenging their blood? Okay, so then of course you'll ask the question, so why would God do it? Well, firstly, we don't know God's ways. There's always mystery to God's ways. As God, we know God created the world, and we were not there when we created it. We don't, just like we don't know why there's good in the world, we also don't know why there's the bad. It gets to the mysteries of life itself. And we have the concept when their death happens, whether it's an individual death, God forbid, or a holocaust of one individual or for many, silence is the best response. We don't have to start pointing fingers and blaming others for their sins or so on. That's not the way of the Jew. As he explains at length in this sikhs that I just cited. She'll say, okay, so 1 second. So what do we do with the Likutei Diburim? What do we do with Akriya V'Kedusha? And many other places that the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying that's due to the sins, and we have to do tshuva, l'alta l'tshuva, l'alta l'gula. So remember, there's a Rambam in the beginning of Hilchas Tainis, and he says that when something, a misfortune or a catastrophe strikes a community or an individual, it would be cruel to say that mikra nikras, that it just happened by accident. Because there's no such thing as accident. Therefore, we have to look and explore introspection and evaluate our own inner lives and the mistakes we've made and the sins to see what we can do to repair and correct our ways, which is the basis of why we fast on a fast day. The fast days that were correct connected with the destruction of the temple. We don't just look at destruction and the negative events as mikra nikras, but we see it as something that we have to not ignore but do something about it. It doesn't say and point a finger, this happened because you did a sin. We're looking at ourselves. When the Frierdiker Rebbe says that it was due to sins, it's not contradicting. He's saying that since a war is going on, Jews are being slaughtered, and here we are in America. We have to look at ourselves, what are we doing? He wasn't pointing fingers and says, they deserve it, let them get killed. God forbid. God forbid. First of all, even if there's that element, we have to pray that there shouldn't be anything should happen. We pray all the time. Moshe Rabbeinu prayed and said, Lama yireis l'am hazeh. Why is Pharaoh, why are you, God, doing evil to these people? We pray and so on. But even beyond that, there's introspection. We don't just say, okay, great, God is great. God is punishing his people for their sins. Let's go on with life. No, you see such a thing, it'd be cruel. We have to look at ourselves. We never point fingers at somebody else. So there's two aspects to this. To say the Holocaust is a pure punishment, that's not our business. We don't know what's a punishment, what's not. It's God's business. And number two, clearly the Rebbe says it's befedish, not a punishment. It's completely not commensurate to the cruelty. As he says, their good accumulates. Because with that attitude, you keep saying every time someone does bad, God continues, and maybe, God forbid, Mashiach won't come. Why? Because we did sins. Sins get erased by anything we've suffered, and we've suffered much more than the Holocaust before that. Good does not get erased. So therefore, there's always the need, there's always understanding that the evil is erased. How much more do we need erasing? And the Holocaust was beyond, as I said, as he explains there. Why it happened? This is the mysteries of God's ways, and we just shake, we're quiet, we don't know, and we don't have to try to explain it. As the same Frierdiker Rebbe, by the way, told another Rebbe who was trying to justify why it happened, he says God doesn't need an advocate. Same Frierdiker Rebbe that says Shabbos, because the Frierdiker Rebbe was not pointing fingers and saying, okay, we can explain God's ways. That's not what the Frierdiker Rebbe was doing. The Frierdiker Rebbe said, what can we do? We cannot remain silent. We have to Studim the Welt. We have to turn over the world and do whatever we can. And also Jews are a group, a community. We're talking about one individual. We're talking about all of us. We're all one. So even though we're here in America and it's not happening to us, but we're part of them. What are we doing? At the same time, that it goes hand in hand with the fact that there's an element of that's exerted that we cannot understand. So we accept it's exerted and we do whatever we can to mend our ways, to be better, to learn lessons from it for ourselves, not to tell someone else how wrong they are and they have to do tshuva. You do tshuva, because you're also part of the same Jewish community. So I hope that satisfies that. You can look it up more in detail in that sikh. Okay. Let's do a few follow-ups, and then we will do the Chassidus question and the essays. Good. Follow-up. I spoke about the number of the last few weeks in the episodes 209, 210 about the title was Chassidim not being scrupulous with blessings on trees. So if someone wrote, it's a misleading title. From your title, it appears that Chassidim are not scrupulous to fulfill the mitzvah of making a blessing on the trees. That was not the intention. If you heard the program, maybe the title should have said, Chassidim are not scrupulous to go out and look for a tree to make a blessing on, because that was the whole point. Not when you see one, Haraya Ilan, the din is to make a blessing. So obviously they're scrupulous when they see it. But you don't find going out of the way, which is what I discussed. So yes, sometimes the title, in this case, the title maybe should have been different worded, and I stand corrected in that sense. Another person wrote about this, thank you for your great work. Someone asked for a source that we are not makbid to make a bracha on trees in Nisan. It was brought to my attention that in the Sikha of Shabbos Pasha Eiskev, Chof of Tavshin Mem, that's Sif Ayin Tes. Yes, I had the schus to write that Hanocha. The Rebbe discusses this. So there the Rebbe Taka says, he speaks there, the Mishnah says that someone that walks and looks at the ilan and says how beautiful the ilan is mischayiv benafshe. How is that shtim with the halacha? Because the halacha is talking that you're not going around taking a walk and looking for trees. You should be learning Torah. You should be doing positive things. If you see a tree, there's a mitzvah to make the bracha, as the Alter Rebbe speaks about. But to walk around, and this is what you're just like browsing around, taking a nice walk, the Rebbe speaks there about that idea. That's leisurely. That's a leisure thing, and that's not what we're looking. There he's obviously not talking about making a bracha. He's just saying, hey, look at a beautiful tree. The Rebbe dismisses that as being basically walking around being empty, being a ladyge, to put it in simple Yiddish or English. Okay. I'm not sure why Chassidim are not scrupulous about making trees. Here's what I found on the internet. According to Kabbalah, this blessing has special significance. When Jews make this blessing, they are able to redeem souls who have been reincarnated in the vegetal realm, making it possible for them to continue to complete their soul rectification. It should therefore be said with intense concentration. Someone wrote this article. If we care about our fellow Jew, this blessing is of great importance, and the Rebbe could not ignore it. Sorry, it's just my guess, but I do not have any proof on that from any source. Honestly, I don't know if what this person writes in the article, and I'm not going to mention names, is accurate. I don't know what the source for that is, according to Kabbalah. Obviously, when you make a bracha, there's always all kinds of deeper things that happen. But to go out of your way to do that, it doesn't say there's any mitzvah to do that, just like there's no going out of your way for Shiluach HaKan. Though the mitzvah Shiluach HaKan, if you look in Chassidus, talks tremendous Giluyim and tremendous Hamshachas that come through that. But there's a difference between seeing it and doing it or going out of the way to do that. So it doesn't change really the picture that we discussed. We also spoke about non-kosher animals and children. I like your video, someone writes, and I have one thing to add. One of the Rebbe's secretaries told me that bedived frogs would be okay to show children because they have Mesiras Nefesh for the Yidden to jump into the ovens in Mitzrayim. Again, only bedived if you already have it. If you want to repeat this, please speak to the secretary directly and don't rely on me. Thanks. I would need to confirm that, but I'm just reading what somebody wrote. If somebody has direct confirmation or actual source for this, we can talk about it. I don't know if it contradicts. A frog is still a frog. That there's lessons like we learn. Going to the zoo, there's lessons we learn lessons from a cat. Tznius, modesty. So you can learn lessons from a frog that it went into the oven. But that doesn't mean we go out of our way to look for frogs or to give our children frogs. Number 2, following up from what you mentioned about the butterflies, if we are really concerned about butterflies, then why is it a given that we go to the zoo and look at all animals? Is that something wrong? Should we not be going? The Rebbe makes it clear in that Sikha again, Chav Chezr Mem Daled, that there is absolutely, we can go to the zoo. Does it mean you have to go every day? You have to run after it? He makes it clear that's also not. But going to a zoo has an element of seeing God's creations and seeing Morabu Masacha, Gadol Masacha, as I discussed that. Another discussion, another follow-up is about Yisrael Aryaleib, Rabbi Yisrael Aryaleib, the Rebbe's brother. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I really appreciate that you did not shy away from the question last week about the Rebbe's brother. I want to say that I listened to other episodes where you quoted and elaborated upon the Rebbe's sikhs pertaining to Yisrael Aryaleib, and your explanation really resonates with me. I just want to say that the question wasn't just to probe Rabbi Yisrael Aryaleib's life as a historian, but rather to understand a few points. One, how to go about his yahrzeit. The Rebbe said memorim in his honor, and many celebrate his yahrzeit by going to his kever or a farbrengen. What is the proper way to go to the kever or hold a farbrengen for his yahrzeit? 2, how to look at the Rebbe or the previous Rebbe giving someone who may ostensibly not look observant, kiruvim. It seems like there's a lot of confusion in this. For example, I recently came across a book about the reconciliation of Torah and science, and the author writes that his inspiration was from Rabbi Yisrael Aryaleib, who more than anyone else, he represented in his relationship between Torah and science. It seems that the Rebbe gave different people kiruvim, for example, Israeli politicians, in order to bring them closer to Yiddishkeit and to encourage them in their mission. However, it seems to me that people take these people and make them heroes in Chabad. A good example of this is the Rebbe's tremendous kiruv towards the late Zalman Shazar. To many, this is taken to mean that he is our great hero, and people describe him as a great chassid. This is despite the fact that he was involved in horrific acts such as being Minister of Education, heading a campaign to secularize innocent Yemenite youth by kidnapping them. Look, as I said then, I'll say it again. I'm not here to talk about the Rebbe's brother. I'm reading it because I read letters, but it's not our business. I am not here to paskin. How do we know B'chal what the Rebbe's brother did? I never met him. I never saw him. I heard things. Even the people that said things said they didn't know everything about him. So I don't want to talk about it. It's not even our role. The concept of reaching out to every Jew, absolutely. But I don't think the Rebbe's brother is part of this equation. It's the Rebbe's family. As the Rebbe once said, we have to stay away from his family. It's a Rebbe's family. It's not our business to go there, do miftzayim, and so on. Another person writes, the Rebbe's brother's episode. Maybe the person asking about the Rebbe's brother doesn't want to know so much about the Rebbe's brother, but about learning Chassidus. Namely, will teaching Chassidus to one's children or others influence them to be God-fearing? In this case, it seems it did not. So what can we do to raise God-fearing children or influence others to be more God-fearing? I say exactly the same thing. Firstly, you don't know what the Chassidus did for him, didn't do. I'm sure it had a deep impact. And most importantly, we are told to do Torah mitzvahs. What are you going to say? Because somebody, Acher, or others, went up to the Pardes and something happened there, or because somebody learned Torah mitzvahs may not be following and being the highest level of Yiras Shamayim, so we shouldn't teach our children Torah mitzvahs. I don't understand the logic here. The Rebbe's brother is the Rebbe's brother, and I think we should leave him alone. It's a schus, the Rebbe's brother, schus of his own ovis. And whatever, you look at the Rebbe's sichas, the Rebbe talks about it enough to understand what we should learn from it. And that's sufficient. People are seemingly obsessed with something which I don't think is appropriate. And if you want to learn some lessons in Shuvah. There are many lessons to be learned from many different people. Okay. Chassidus question. Last week you discussed the Chabad custom of wearing a hat and a yarmulke. Please explain the idea of the two makifim we wear on our heads. With that, I received a number of follow-up letters to the knitted yarmulke discussion. So let me read them and then I'll answer the Chassidus question, which is actually what is the meaning of the two makifim. Regarding the discussion of yarmulkes and two head covering makifim, it would seem to me that wearing a yarmulke with two layers of fabric is certainly not considered as wearing two separate head coverings. If it were, it would be forbidden to wear, as the poskim forbid putting on or removing two layers of clothing together. See the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch 2.3 regarding putting on two items of clothing. See the Mittler Rebbe's Ateres Reish Shai Yom Kippurim at the end of Sif 2 regarding removing two items of clothing. There are other sources relevant to this discussion, but these spring to mind immediately. Rather, it would seem that a yarmulke is always treated as a single head covering, regardless of how many layers of fabric it has, as is treated as a single item of clothing. In the same way that a coat or a jacket is considered a single item of clothing, even though it may have an inner and outer lining. And for this reason, yarmulkes are permitted to be worn. Knitted yarmulkes, meaning one layer yarmulkes, are permitted to be worn. It would seem that in order to fulfill the requirement of having a double head covering, one must wear two distinct items of clothing, such as a yarmulke and a hat, etc., as it is specified in the Rebbe's letter, which you mentioned. Thank you so much for your amazing work, especially the weekly My Life program. I hope you have continued and increased success. Best wishes. Good. P.S. I'm a bocher, not a rabbi or pesach. However, the above is my understanding of the halacha based on the poskim. Rabbi Jacobson, another writer, writes, once again, you started off the week for us with a beautiful message on the Parsha and then moving on to addressing day-to-day life with the warmth of Chassidus and our Rebbe. I enjoyed the explanation you provided for the yarmulke. You touched upon the explanation of the two coverings. While we are on this topic, can you shed light on the idea why we wear some yarmulkes split into 6 parts and some have 4, if there's an idea to try to get either of them? Finally, thanks for all you do. We look forward every week to hearing your voice that keeps Chassidus relevant, alive, and motivates us to think differently when encountering anything throughout the day. I'm not going to speak about the 4 and 6. If anyone, by the way, has any information on that, please send it to me because I plan to speak about it next week or in the coming weeks. But I will speak about the double makif in a moment. One more writer writes, knitted kippah. I see that really has stimulated many people. I've seen some Chassidish shluchim wearing knitted kippahs. I see nothing wrong with them. Chazak v'amatz. And finally, one more. I heard from a friend that Al Elam Shayid once did him a favor, and in sincere, deep appreciation, he said, Yesher Kayach Gadol. The fellow misunderstood and clarified, I'm not a Gadol. Gadol means a great person, but he meant a great thank you. Although I do not get to watch your Sunday programs, I was alerted to the knitted yarmulke question, enjoyed the story of Bialik, and your public wish to become more of a Yiddish Shemayim. The purpose of my writing is to thank you for this important weekly broadcast. Yesher Kayach Gadol, whether you are or aren't, and whatever size the yarmulke on your head, whatever size the yarmulke or head, and continued Hatzlach. Now, regarding the question itself, the Chassidus question, let me respond. There's actually a mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's called Tzer Tasel Lateva Tofresh Pei Gimel. It's in Sefer Maimorim Tofresh Pei Gimel, page 140. And also look in my Sefer Maimorim Tofshin Zayin, page 185. And there he says the following. That in Kedusha, in holiness, there are two makifim. Makifim is a transcendent energy. The makif of Chaya and the makif of Yechida. Chaya is, we know, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida, 5 dimensions of the soul. Naran, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama are the imminent faculties. Nefesh is biological life, or Nehi, Netzach Yesod. Ruach is emotional life, or Chagas, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes. And Neshama is Chabad. So you have the 10 spheres. Malchus is not counted in that particular structure, but you have the 10 spheres, the eminent, the revealed faculties, or the revealed spheres. But then there's Keser. Keser as Atik and Arich. They correspond to Chaya, which is Arich, transcendent, and there's the transcendent of the transcendent, sometimes called Neshama l'Neshama, and they break down into 2. This is Makeiches Makifim. They're not internal faculties, but they're transcendent faculties. A transcendent faculty means it transcends our being and our existence. And that means that we don't have it's not a particular location. In the Keiches HaNefesh, it's sometimes desire, Ratzon, and Tainug. Desire and pleasure. So there's Makif of Chaya and Makif of Yechida, that's Makif of the Makif. That means, he says, it's Kashus Atzmis and Primis that has a fundamental core connection to the source. In Klippus, you don't have Bavur de Bavur Leslo, you don't have the shadow of the shadow, meaning these Makifim. And that's why Hareitzim L'Kabel Aleim El Machos Shemayim, somebody that wants to accept upon himself the yoke of heaven completely, that everything that he does should be aligned to the inner intention of the divine, covers their head with 2 Makifim. That's the explanation there, and that's the explanation for these Makifim. Let us now continue, and that's why we wear a hat and a yarmulke, as it says in Sefer Minhagim, the Rebbe's letter that I cited last week. Let us now do the essays, and we will conclude. The essays are 3 essays, as always, in this 2008 contest. The first is Parenting, Crisis as Growth, Gali Yeshua, age 38, Israel. Beautiful essay written about the stages of development and our relationship in parenting, the process of growing up, based on Kabbalistic sources, and going through the process from babyhood, through adolescence, through adulthood, and how the parents' relationship with the children are commensurate to these stages. It's an excellent overview, an excellent comprehensive overview of parenting through the context of Kabbalistic and the mystical teachings of Chassidus, and how the concepts of stages of separation, stages of sweetening, and the conclusion of these 3 stages in parenting. So it's a parenting, you can say, almost a parenting guide based on the Kabbalistic and Chassidic view of the development of every child into adulthood. Essay number 2 that we're covering now is Serving God Despite Challenge, 4 Steps of How To. Rachel Schwartz, age 20, Chicago, Illinois, student in Beis Rivka Seminary and dorm counselor in Benos Menachem High School. She writes, the Frierdiker Rebbe once asked his father, the Rebbe Rashab, what is the factor that holds all of one's service of God together? And the Rebbe Rashab answered, man's belief in his ability to change. Goes on to discuss life as struggle, the struggle of life, but the ability to change. And accepting the phenomenon of lifelong struggle, 4 steps that she talks about. The first is accepting the phenomenon. 2, becoming accustomed to the pain of saying no. 3, trust that he will make you win. And 4, cultivate a passionate, warm, and joyous relationship with God. Very well done, well annotated, and I congratulate you for that. Okay. And finally, essay number 3, discernment as a foundation for refining the soul and optimizing its health. Roy Lugasi, age 36, Kiryat Gat, Israel. Works in a engineering office and managing projects managers in Chabad Yeshiva in Kiryat Gat. This is a beautiful essay taking the concept of discernment of Das and how we can deal with the different struggles that we deal with in life. Well done in overview of life's challenges as well, describing our individuality as opposed to God's identity and the different versions of how people reconcile that, but ultimately coming away with a discernment that when you understand structure through Das, Havdalah, you're able to come to a type of peace and harmony in a person's life. All these essays can be seen at meaningfullife.com/mylife. And with this, we conclude this week's episode 211 of My Life Chassidus Applied. I want to wish you all a very freiliche Pesach Sheni, Nishtakim Farfalm. Again, please help us by sponsoring classes and programs. And with that, every Sunday we're here from 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a very blessed week. Thank you.